Okay, I'm Jacob Hornberger and president of the Future of Freedom Foundation, the sponsor of this online conference series of talks. It's great to have you all here. As you all know, the FFF has been in existence now for some 34 years, and throughout that time, our mission has always been to present the principled, uncompromising case for all aspects of the libertarian philosophy. And part of this, of course, is the area of immigration. And so why are we having this conference? Well, look, we're not naive. We know we're going against the tide. We've been going against the tide for 34 years on this issue. But it's one of the burning issues of our time. And we've seen the morass that it has produced all of our lives. I mean, all my life. I grew up on the border. I saw what was going on down there. I've seen the police state. I've experienced the police state. This morass has been here ever since we were born. All of us living today. It's everlasting, it's perpetual. And it brings death and suffering and a massive police state. So we decided let's hit it on directly, especially during this presidential race. It's one of the most critically important issues of our time. Let's just go for it. Let's pull together some of the best speakers and presenters in this libertarian movement. And well, one speaker's outside the libertarian movement, but on this issue of open borders, because it is so important. For 34 years, I've said there is only one solution to this morass, only one, and that's open borders. There's none other. It's like beating my head up against the wall. That's the only solution, and that's what's going to be presented in this conference. Now, there'll be variations clearly between the speakers. That's what's going to make it fun. We couldn't start out with a better presenter on this issue than Richard Ebeling. Richard and I go back to our Dallas days when we first met. I was practicing law there in Dallas, and one of the things that made our friendship so solid was that we were on the same page on just about every single issue, including immigration. And when I started FFF, I asked Richard to be the vice president of academic affairs. He was at that time Ludwig von Mises Professor of Economics at Hillsdale College. He went on to become president of the Foundation for Economic Education. He's now professor of economics, the BB&T Distinguished Professor of Ethics and Free Enterprise Leadership at the Citadel. But in those early days, Richard told me once we were taking all these principled positions on every aspect of libertarianism. And Richard said, at the end of the year, we're going to alienate everybody. And then I'm going to see what I can do to get rid of you by taking some principled position. But we were able to attract over the years a certain number of people that liked our principled approach, even if they didn't agree with everything we said. They said, they saw that it was important to have at least one organization in this movement that makes the principal case all across the board on libertarianism. And for that, we were very, very grateful to have that support that has kept us going for 34 years. And one of the first books we ever published 30 something years ago was a book called The Case for Free Trade and Open Immigration, co-edited by Richard and me. But Richard was the principal editor of that book. I was the co-editor, but he did most of the work on it. And it's one of those timeless books, but it shows you we're not newcomers to this issue. I would say that I think we've been the leader in the libertarian movement in favor of open borders and making that principled case, the moral case, the economic case, the utilitarian case. So without any further ado, let me turn this over to Richard. Richard Ebeling, take it away.
Thank you. Well, I want to start out by pointing out that when you say the phrase open borders, it arouses a lot of emotions in people. Those emotions may be on the political left or the political right, somewhere in between, but it creates a fear and an anxiety in a lot of individuals, as if there's just nothing. And it's better to understand that open borders does not mean that there's no countries. Open borders does not mean that there aren't administrative lines on a map called the border lines between countries. There are. There have been historically, there are now, invariably there will be for any foreseeable period of the future. But what open borders really means is the right of a freedom to move. That as long as people want to move to someplace other than where they were born or they have been living, because of employment opportunities, a preferred environment socially, culturally, environmentally, uh, a change of wanting to visit there, invest there, retire there. As long as these purposes are voluntary and peaceful, the attitude of the classical liberal, the libertarian, is that a person should be able to do that. The government still has jurisdiction, but as long as a person does nothing to violate the rights of another, their life, liberty, and honestly acquired property, then people should be allowed to move about anywhere they want, whenever they want, how they want, the same way as we take it for granted within the boundaries of the United States that someone living and working in New York can get up and either by car or by train or by airplane, just move and go across the country to Oregon or Arizona or Idaho or Texas or without permission, without permit, without visa, without passport. And people are moving about all the time like this. There are waves of migrations within the country. It has been pointed out by a number of analysts that there is a net outflow of people from such states as New York and California, and who are moving to other states, Texas, Florida, North and South Carolina, for instance. I'm in South Carolina. And no one is apprehensive about this. No one wonders who they are, why they're moving, because as long as a person is not violating the rights of another's, what business is it of anyone else or the government? The premise of the classical liberal and the libertarian is that borders are there to determine jurisdictions over which governments are to administer the law, the rule of law, and the protection of the citizens' rights within that jurisdiction. But it is not to prohibit, restrict, or prevent people from moving about, trading with whom they want, interacting with whom they want, employing whom they want, investing where they want, living where they want. Now, this ideal, which sounds almost utopian to many, how could you even imagine a world like that? Is a world that actually existed 150 years ago. Following the wars with Napoleon, Napoleonic France on one side, and the British and the Germans and the Spaniards and the Swedes and so on, over a period of years following that, the end of those Napoleonic Wars in 1815, starting with Great Britain, passport and visa requirements were virtually eliminated. It was believed as part of that rising tide of classical liberal beliefs, philosophies, and policies that government should not regulate people's employment, their investments, their freedom of open competition with others in the peaceful and voluntary pursuit of earning a living, that individuals should have the right of a freedom to move. Now, what form did this actually take? Well, historians point out that between around 1840, 1845, and the year that the First World War began in 1914, it is estimated that approximately 60 to 65 million people left Europe to make their homes and their livings in other parts of the world. And out of that 60, 65 million people, around 35 million came to the United States. Others went to Canada, Argentina, Brazil, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, and so on. Mexico, Venezuela. But at least more than half came to the United States. And how did they get to the United States? They bought a ticket, either out of their own savings or borrowing money from family members. And usually, if they were poor, and many were, in steerage, right, the cheapest ticket in the bottom of the boat with not much of a view. And they went across the Atlantic and they landed at a place like Ellis Island at the mouth of the Hudson River in New York City. And at that time, were there what now we would call immigration agents? Yes, they were, but they weren't concerned about almost anything. They would just ask two questions. Do you have a communicable disease? That is, if you breathe on someone, for instance, are they going to catch a virus? And if you did, you were kept in quarantine on Ellis Island until the contagion period had passed. And the other question they asked was, did you have mental defect? Today, we can't use the terms they used to use, say, are you an imbecile? Did you have mental defect? And their only concern was that you would be a burden on others in society. And remember, there was no welfare state in the 19th century. Their concern would you be an excessive burden on private charity, private charity. And just historically as a fact, as long as you did not have a contagious disease and you didn't seem to have a mental defect, you boarded a ferry on Ellis Island. You took the brief ride to South Manhattan, got off at the dock, and welcome. Now make a new life in America. And they started in these cities and then spread out across the country and populated and settled and created the cities and the towns and the industries and the farms that have all become the America of today. Now, when these people made this choice, why did they make these choice? Well, in general, there were three reasons: religious persecution, political oppression, a lack of economic opportunities to feed oneself, to get a better life for oneself and one's family because of the restrictions, the controls, the corruptions of their own political environment in what used to be called, quote, the old country. So they came here for the economic freedom of America. They worked hard. They supported their families. They were proud to become Americans. And they are our ancestors. I'll just use myself as an example, if I may. On both sides of my family, my father and my mother, my grandparents, respectively, came to the United States as very little children in the first decade of the 20th century, around 1905, according to the records at Ellis Island, which my wife has found digitalized. Now, why did they come here? Well, on my father's side, that was German and Irish and English. And there was just poverty and difficulties of opportunity. And so they wanted to have a chance. On my mother's side, they were basically Russian and Lithuanian Jews who wanted to leave imperial czarist Russia because of religious persecution and the violence of the Cossacks coming into a Jewish village and undertaking a pogrom, burning down the village, beating and killing people because, Jews were, the Christ killers. And they came here to escape from the same things that virtually all these other people were coming to escape from. They were draft dodgers. A large number of Germans came to America in the 1860s and 1870s, escaping military conscription during the time when Otto von Bismarck, the German chancellor, was fighting wars to try to unify all the little German principalities under the leadership of Prussia. So draft dodgers came to America. People of all these different types of backgrounds came to America. And we are their descendants. They're our ancestors. And they all came here and these melting pots went on. Now, today, some people say, but aren't the people coming today different? Well, it all depends upon what you mean by different. Do they look a little different? They come from different parts of the world than many of our ancestors who came from Europe. But if you ask them, or if you find out the motives and the reasons why they too want their second chance for a life in America the way our ancestors did, the reasons are usually not much different. Economic poverty because of the corruptions and the statist policies in their homeland, political oppression, and religious persecution. The same reasons. The only difference between them and us in virtually all cases is that this is a slightly different shade. And this means nothing. What matters is what you are as a human being. And as long as people want to come to America and live and act peacefully so as not to be violators of others' rights in the classical liberal libertarian sense of not violating your neighbor's life, liberty, and honestly acquired property, then to be honest, I see no reason why they cannot come here. Now, let me briefly talk about another number of issues that sort of come up in this. Uh, One is, but aren't these immigrants going to steal Americans' jobs? You often hear this from some of the prominent political candidates who are running for the presidency of the United States but who will remain nameless. Won't they steal American jobs? And the answer is no. Will they compete with some existing jobs? Possibly. But if you look at the patterns, those who come here often start at the bottom rung of the economic ladder. They clean houses, they do our laundry, they take care of our children, they mow our lawns, they paint our houses, they're working in construction companies. They do the hard labor intensive work. But if we could go back in a time machine and say, well, in the historical context of the 1840s, the historical context of the 1880s, the historical context of the 1910s and so on, or the historical context of the 1960s or 70s, who are these people? And you would find that they were different social or racial or ethnic or linguistic groups, but they all started at the bottom. And then either they, through work and effort and savings, and of course, always a little bit of luck, rose up. And if they did not really achieve much, their children and grandchildren rose up. Education, professions, better quality jobs, better paying jobs, just moving up. And then those tasks, which they did as a wave of immigrants, are now replaced by the next wave. And the whole chain continues in these patterns of often at the bottom, working hard, moving up. At least your children and grandchildren do a lot better than you. And then the next wave and the next wave. And what they do is they fill gaps that otherwise wouldn't be done. I mean, one of the difficulties in the American economy is precisely because we're so rich as a people as a whole and are so much more picky and choosy about the work we do and the work conditions under which we do it. Many, quote, Native Americans don't want to do those jobs. And in fact, it isn't that the immigrants in these waves take away jobs, they fill niches that otherwise would be left empty or far more costly to fill if they had to be paid wages matching the opportunity cost of those with more education and more skills and less willingness to do that type of labor intensive work. So, in fact, it provides services that otherwise we wouldn't have and which we take for granted and which make our lives in invisible ways often a lot easier, but without burdening us with excessive costs. But those are the bottom rungs of the ladder for that next wave of immigrants to be moving up, and then the next wave, and the next wave, and the next wave. The other thing that strikes me is that, we live at a time when uh, many Americans, sometimes reasonably and sometimes not, how they view the role of government in society, uh, you know, don't always feel proud to be an American. And there could be right reasons and wrong reasons for feeling that way. But what stands out often when you talk to immigrants, when they come here and they've been here for a while, they're unbelievably patriotic. And I don't mean in the gung-ho, jingoistic sense. They feel patriotic to now be Americans because America has given them opportunities, chances, safety, security, income possibilities that they could have never had in the old country. And that makes them proud to be part of a country which otherwise would never have given them these chances. They're the ones who often are the little flag wavers. Again, right reasons, wrong reasons maybe, but the little flag wavers. The other thing that I want, and by the way, the immigrants aren't just like in the lower categories. There are many niches that need to be filled in professional occupations, college level skills, professions that require long years of experience and education. And there's many more that are needed. Uh, and often this is due to the restraints within the American economy. The control that medical schools and the Medical Association have on the number of entrants they allow into American medical schools to become qualified physicians so narrows the supply that constantly is needed by the demands of people in the society that often the only way to fill them is with people who have acquired medical degrees, can go through a time of retaking some courses, internships again, but then adding to the supply of medical doctors. Otherwise, particularly rural areas might very well have no physicians to fill the local hospitals, precisely because of the rigidities on entry into the market that the American Medical Association imposes as restrictions on increasing the supply. So it's not just those at the lowest totem pole. It's all across the bay. So at the end of the day, uh, more hands means more work that can be done. And more work means more goods and services that can be available at either the same cost or even lower costs to increase our standards of living. So this current concern is in my opinion, not relevant, in spite of what, as I said, a prominent candidate for the presidency frequently says. The other thing that I want to mention is that what about that they're different? They speak different languages, they have different cultures, they may practice different religions. But this too is nothing new in American history. The Native Americans, I don't mean the Indians, but the generations of Americans who already had been here and were born here, they showed these same prejudices and animosities. The Irish started coming in the 1840s because of the potato famine in Ireland. And when they showed up, what did a lot of Americans say? Oh, how can those Irish ever be real Americans? Why, they're Pope worshippers, they're Catholics. How can a Pope worshiper who takes his command from Rome ever be a real American? And on top of that, they're all drunks. And then the same thing with the Germans, who, as I said, often came here as draft dodgers, but not for only that reason. Oh, those damn Germans. They cluster in their own little tight-knit communities, and they don't want to learn English. They don't want to speak German. They have their own little German language newspapers and books that they read. And on a Sunday, they go to the local park and they like to listen to that pa music while drinking beer in the big Steiner. Oh, those damn Germans. They'll never be real Americans. And then there were the waves of the Italians and the Poles. Oh my gosh, Italians and Poles, more Pope worshippers. Oh, more Catholics. Oh, it's the end of the real America. And besides, those Poles, don't they drink a lot too? And they're lazy. They're an inferior type. And then in the 1880s, 1890s, the first decade, as I said, a lot of Eastern European Jews came to escape from the persecutions and the oppressions, particularly in Imperial Russia. Oh my gosh, now the Jews are coming. How can they ever be real Americans? They killed Jesus. They kidnapped Christian kids to drain their blood to make matzah bread. Oh, and they're all greedy and cheap businessmen who, besides, are all communists. This is the mindsets of previous generations. These prejudices, these narrow-mindedness, I'll be honest, these total misplaced and absurd bigotries are nothing new when people say their own things about the new waves of immigrants coming to America. But what stands out is that the first generation has a hard time adjusting to American culture, perhaps, and they have difficulty learning English. They speak a broken English. Their children, who were either came here very small or were born here, they are bilingual. They speak the old language, the old country language with their folks at home, but they speak English outside the family setting or the immediate community setting. And then their children, the grandchildren of the immigrant, often don't have any knowledge of their grandparents' language. And in fact, they're often a little embarrassed by it. Oh, they talk with an accent and they eat that funny food. But what stands out is how this becomes the melting pot of just a new thing called American culture, bringing together all these, in the proper sense, diversities of a process, again, in the right sense, of an inclusiveness of the free society. So that by waves of these, where they came from, why they came from, are just lost. The thing that stands out in my mind also, as a professor, from the time when I was a boy myself in school and now in the classroom as a professor, is when I was a boy, it was not uncommon. I grew up in the greater New York area at first, before my family moved to California. And it was not uncommon. Well, who are you? Oh, I'm an Italian American. I'm an Irish American. I'm a Jewish American. You go on and on and on, right? Now, I ask my students today, Well, do you know whether it was your grandparents or your great grandparents who came to America? Uh, Most don't. Some do, but most don't. Well, if they do know that they came from some country, do you know when they came? I have no idea. Do you know why they came? I never asked and I was never told. It doesn't matter. It's just Americans. And if you look ahead to 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 30 years from now, those who seem, quote, foreign to us as the latest waves of immigrants will be no different than all these previous waves. Their children, their grandchildren, assuming the government doesn't do things to make it more burdensome and difficult to do so, will just immerse themselves and become just Americans. And more things will have been added to our culture, our linguistic uh, taking of words from different backgrounds, our cuisines, our music. And America will again be this unique thing that brings all cultures and all peoples together in this unique combination that is different from other societies. The one other thing that I would say that makes this a unique experience is that, well, what makes you an American? Now, if you travel to Japan, the only thing that will get you recognized as a Japanese is if you were born in Japan. But of generations of Japanese ethnic ancestry, Japan ruled Korea from 1895 until 1945, uh, at, until the end of the Second World War. And over that long stretch of a half a century, many Koreans, either by choice or being brought there by the Japanese to do work, ended up coming to the Japanese home islands from Korea. Now, their descendants have only known life in Japan. But even if you're the great grandchild of some Korean who came from Korea, let's say in 1900, in Japanese society, they're not viewed as Japanese. They'll always be something different. Koreans who have been born in Japan and have a Japanese passport, but they're not really Japanese. The same thing applies in many European countries. What makes you a German? Well, you have to demonstrate an ancestry of your peoples of past generations came from Germany. For instance, at the end of the Soviet Union, there were many descendants of what were called the Volga Germans. These were Germans who had come to Imperial Russia in the late 18th and in the 19th century as immigrants brought for work, professional activities, new agricultural methods to introduce into Russia. And then they suffered terrible oppression and persecution under the Stalin years, particularly during the war. Oh, these are Germans. They're not real Soviets or Russians. But as the Soviet Union was collapsing in the late 1980s, many of their many of the ancestors of those early German Volga Germans wanted to leave Russia, or before that, just to leave the Soviet Union. They wanted to go to Germany, but they had to prove to the German governmental authorities that they could show this biological lineage from Germans who had originally been from Germany. Otherwise, they couldn't claim German citizenship or settlement back in Germany, just a freedom to move out of Russia to Germany as a choice. In America, that's never been the concern. When an American becomes a citizen, if they have come from a foreign land, you take your oath of allegiance. And if you read that oath of allegiance, most of us being born here have never had, you forgo all allegiances to foreign governments and potentates, forswearing all such loyalties. And you give an allegiance to the Constitution of the United States. Well, what is the Constitution of the United States? It's an organizational chart. If you read it, here's the job of the executive branch, here's the job of the judiciary, here's the job of the legislative branch, Congress, and these are their designated divided powers. That's what you're giving a Pledge of Allegiance. Who gives a Pledge of Allegiance to an organizational chart? Why are you giving that Pledge of Allegiance? and loyalty to that organizational chart of the US Constitution. Because the Constitution is meant to be the institutional document that embodies and represents the philosophical ideals in that earlier document of the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men, and that means in spite of the wokeness, women too, all men are created equal and are endowed with rights that are unalienable: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. All human beings are believed to have these rights inherently, just as an individual person. And what makes you an American is implicitly, in taking that oath, a desire to join a community of people who want to live in and value freedom. And that's what has guided the waves of immigrants to America. It's no different. Now, I know that in present circumstances, a lot of counter arguments are made. Don't they live off welfare? Aren't they a burden on the educational system? Don't the Democrats want to bring them in so they'll always keep Democrats in power versus the Republicans? Well, let's again very briefly talk about this. Most studies show that the vast majority of immigrants do not immediately want or go on or stay on welfare. They want jobs, just like most other people. They want a sense of self-respect, self-responsibility, the ability to raise their family, to teach their family values. And this is another thing with these waves of recent immigrants. Most of them believe in hard work, self-responsibility, and teaching values to their children. Oh, why would we want people like that in America? So in fact, it is an exaggeration, just as a practical fact, of the supposed burden on these infrastructure matters of education or medicine and so on, or just welfare payments. It is an exaggeration. Uh, the other element is this, that I would argue, is that it's not only this, but that, the presumption, again, which some people running for the office of the presidency this year makes it, every immigrant is a rapist. Every immigrant is a child molester. Every immigrant is a drug dealer or a human trafficker. This is not true. These waves of people are no different than all of the rest of us. Are there such people like that? Well, let me ask you, are there no such people like that among the Native American population? Aren't there child molesters who may be undetected and leave Oregon to move to Illinois? Aren't there people who might be, serial killers who have been living in Vermont who now take their trade to Texas? Are we to have barriers between the states because, well, we don't know who's moving there? These things remain, however tragic, and however the law is supposed to prevent violence and harm to individuals against their inherent rights. The vast majority of people who come to America, like the rest of us, do not fit these categories. If there was that much crime, that much serial killing, that much violence, the society couldn't exist. But society does exist. Doesn't mean that crime does not occur. It doesn't mean that bad acts aren't happening. And it doesn't change the fact that if we're going to have a government, that's its primary purpose. But these people are no different than the rest of us. And if they come here and violate the rights of others, then they will be held accountable before the law. The same way someone who's been living in Oregon who moves to Georgia and commits a crime is then responsible to be facing the law in Georgia. It's no different. To close the door to these multitudes of people, similar to the multitudes who wanted to come here and did come here before, to breathe free, would be denying them a basic liberty to have their second chance, just as we're the beneficiaries of our ancestors who came here for their second chance. The skills, the knowledge, the talents, the working abilities, the filling of niches of jobs, and the denial of a basic dignity. And I'll just add one or two more things. let us suppose we close the door even more than we have. I'm not even talking about how harsh it is already, but if we close the door even more than we have, what happens to these people? You know, the famous German free market economist Wilhelm Röpke wrote an article decades ago called Barriers to Migration. And he said, nothing makes of individual a victim and a prisoner of the state than the realization on his part that even if he could get out of the country where he's locked in, no one will allow him to come in. Your fate is sealed, even if you can escape, because the door is closed for you to have a place to go to. And nothing, he says, results in an individual feeling so much as a cog in the machine of his own tyrannical state, whether it's be political tyranny, a religious persecution, lack of economic opportunity of privilege and favoritism and government collectivism, than to feel that one has no future, one no means to escape, and it destroys a person psychologically, their sense of being a person. Because even if I could get over the wall, there's no free country to go to. America has been that free country. That is our entire history. We should be proud of it rather than embarrassed by it. We should envelop it rather than attempting to close it, because it is part of the very ideal of freedom. The free movement of goods, the free movement of money, and the free movement of people, of men. That is the basis and the ideal and the principle that should guide us in all that we do in advocating the free society. Because unless you see the logic of the interconnected rightness and justice and economic value of all of them, then one being closed easily becomes spilling over to the rest. And before you know it, freedom is gone in not just a few areas, but all of them. Let us have the ideal and the principle and the accepted right of a freedom to move. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Richard. Excellent presentation. Not surprisingly, we have a lot of great questions. And let me say this, first of all, thank you all very much for coming. Thanks for the great questions. If we don't get to all of them, we will get to all of them by the end of this series. We've got, I think, 7 speakers, and we'll get to all of them. But let's get right into it. Let me go to one that I think hits a real excellent point here. And now this question was done before, right midway through your talk, but I'd like you to address it though, Richard. It says, Richard, you make an excellent argument. This is from Thomas, for immigration, but not for open borders. Open borders implies zero restrictions and makes illegal immigration legal. So what do you say?
Yes, there should be no illegal immigration, because if you allow freedom to move, everyone is legally moving. This category is artificial. It is imposed by the government when it shouldn't be there. It's illegal to sell drugs. And if you're a classic liberal or a libertarian, you think that government prohibition on the manufacture and the sale and the purchase and use of drugs is misplaced. It doesn't mean you agree with the taking of drugs. Okay? But the state should not be involved. And to say that he is doing something illegal in buying or using drugs, and therefore, he's somehow in the wrong, is because you've made it a category like that. Again, it's not that the countries don't have jurisdictions. There's the United States. But just as you move between states, people should be allowed to move from Mexico or Canada into the United States, or to fly in or take a boat from other countries around the world. There should not be a category of illegal immigration, because people should have a freedom to move, and then every movement is legal as long as the person doesn't violate the rights of another human being.
Okay. This is John from South Carolina. He says, Richard, I'm a South Carolinian, apprehensive about statists moving like blind locusts from the states they have destroyed to states like mine. far from the best, but still better than Connecticut, where they will continue the destruction there in South Carolina. Does culture's impact on political culture and therefore the popular notion of and respect for your natural rights matter in any way in your worldview? Does your notion of open borders include a change to, is a different question. Does your notion of open borders include a change to citizenship rules, example, birthright?
Okay.
So the
Let me
first
start
one's
off
a
with the first
culture
part.
argument.
Let me
Yeah.
start with the first part. I live here in South Carolina. My wife and I have lived here for 10 years. We have a dog. My dog usually likes to do a cameo appearance, but I locked him out of the room. I'm sure he's depressed now. But so when my wife and I started finding a place to take him to run, there's a very large dog park at a park near here. So, it's a way of socializing. You talk to the different owners. You start with dog talk, right? Oh, what a cute puppy. But then, well, where are you from? How long you been here? And then I understand what this fellow is saying. Oh, you moved from Oregon, you moved from New York, you moved from Massachusetts. Yeah, it's terrible there, those taxes and everything. But it's weird down here in South Carolina. Why do you find it weird? They don't believe in necessary government regulations. They want us not pay the taxes to have all these good services. And I said, but wait a minute, isn't that you were escaping from? That's when you left Massachusetts or California or Indiana, Illinois, whatever. Yeah, but it's too weird. Don't you need government to do these things? I mean, there's a schizophrenia there. And obviously so. There are these cultures. But the fact is that the solution to that is what my wife and I have tactfully done over going to the dog park several times a week and running into these people. You know, you raised an interesting issue there, but isn't it possible to have a society with smaller government and the taxes levels that you were escaping from by leaving these things to the market and allowing people to have freedom of choice and not having these monopoly government programs that restrict the very opportunities that you felt narrowed about where you came from. And sometimes, and slowly but surely, far certainly not batting 100, uh, you win some people over. And that's how ideas spread. That's how ideas spread. I can assure you there are a good number of, quote, native-born South Carolinians who hold views very far from the freedom philosophy that the Future Freedom Foundation advocates, or myself. And as a consequence, you just work at making people think, but well, why did you move? What are the opportunities here? Why would you not want to escape from where you left, which you've done? Think about why things are not weird here, but to the extent that they are less tax oppressive, less regulated. South Carolina is very far from being a laissez-faire state, that's for sure. But in comparison, what are the benefits of this that have drawn you here? And just try to win people over. Now, people come from a lot of different cultures, but this is waves of this. To give the idea of, oh, but if too many come from these different mindsets and cultures, when the census was taken in 1900, at the beginning of the 20th century, right? They take the population count every 10 years. When they took the census in 1900, it was found out that out of a population of only about 100 million at the time, even a little less, I guess, but 97 million Americans. Out of that approximately 100 million Americans, 1/3 were either immigrants themselves or the direct children of immigrants. 1/3 of the country was made up by immigrants of different cultures, different languages, different ways of everyday living. But they all came together and immersed and joined this. Even such a large number joining the rest of the country. And that's part of what we are. So these things don't bother me as much. You just have to talk to people and try to educate them and make them aware of these freedom issues and the dangers of government, just in general, and the very things that made them want to move away from a different state that was more oppressive than the one they joined.
Yeah, when you and I were living in Dallas in the 80s, they had the savings and loan crisis, there was a lot of New Yorkers moving down to Texas from Wall Street. And there were signs all over Dallas saying, "We don't care how you did it in New York."
When I moved to Dallas to take up the job at the University of Dallas in Irving, Texas, where we ended up meeting, I was driving around and I'm at a and I reach I'm at an intersection and the light is red, and I'm behind a car that's right ahead of me at the intersection, and on his bumper sticker it says, "If you love New York, get out of town."
All right.
A welcome wagon. Okay.
All right. The second part of the question was, and again, we may not get to all the questions. We're going to try, but I want to also encourage people to make the same question to all the speakers that we're going to present in this, because every speaker's got his freedom to say whatever he wants, and everybody's got a different twist and probably has some variations. But
Yes.
I love these questions. I mean, this is why we have this program. We want to be challenged with these programs. Okay. What about the other one about how about open borders and citizenship? What's the relationship there?
Well, the thing is that starting with the Constitution, there are rules of acquiring citizenship, and I have no problem, in general, philosophically, or just following the institutional legacy of our country in terms of the Constitution, saying you can move here, you can work here, you can live here, you can buy property here, you can start a business here, you can earn a salary by working for someone else here, all the civil liberties. But until you become a citizen, you can't vote, at least in federal elections. That's a sort of a perk that comes with citizenship. I have no problem with that. So I don't see that becomes a now birthright. I mean, again, it is traditionally the case in the United States that if you're born here, you're an American. Uh, and that's just the case. So all this business about, what Trump wants to do, just because you are born here, your parents came in here illegally, you're being thrown out. So you're born in America, you've been living here all your life, and now you're going to be kicked out. You're an American. I'm an American. Even Hornberger is an American. Okay. Born in what, Laredo, I guess? You were born in Laredo. But I mean, so you're an American. That's just the definition of your citizenship. So I have no problem with that. And the idea of kicking people out just because their parents came here illegally under illegality bases that I, as a libertarian, think shouldn't be there to begin with, I wouldn't kick them out. That would be absurd. And of course, that also means, and this is another can of worms in the eyes of many people, all these people who came here illegally, you end these border restrictions and these limitations on immigration, you're now a resident of the United States legally. You should be just viewed as a legal resident, because the category of illegality was inappropriate from the perspective of a free society.
All right. I'm not certain I was born in Laredo. My information is based on hearsay, not personal knowledge.
Well, you were very young at the time. You probably remember very little.
Okay. Next question, another good one. One of the main problems with the open borders policy is that we do not hear simultaneously the libertarian premise of no welfare. More immigrants, more giveaways, more debt, more dependence, etc. How can we clarify our support of absolute freedom to move while maintaining that we libertarians do not sanction a welfare state? In other words, the Milton Friedman argument. You can't have open borders with a welfare state.
Well, the thing, to my mind, okay. I also have nobody should be getting welfare. Now, if you come here as an immigrant and you're not a citizen yet, as a subcategory, you could say that they're not eligible for welfare as in the process of getting rid of welfare for everybody. But the dilemma that you arise in here, let us suppose that there's suddenly a baby boom in the United States, like the post-World War II baby boom. And now you suddenly have this increase of people in the United States from natural births, not from immigrants coming. Are you going to say, oh, we have to stop people having babies because they're now going to be a burden on the healthcare system and they're going to be owed Social Security? get old, and oh God, they grow up. All these extra kids that people have had, and now it costs for them to go to public schools. Oh, we have to stop having people having babies because it's adding to the burden of the welfare state. It's the same logic. What we have to say is that two wrongs don't make a right. Two wrongs don't make a right. First of all, the classical liberal and the libertarian opposes the welfare state. He thinks that it is not the duty and the responsibility of government to redistribute wealth in these manners, and that in fact there's a whole variety of counter beneficial effects that these have that would be off our topic as to why the welfare state is detrimental to freedom, efficiency, productivity, market opportunities, better healthcare, better education, better retirement, et cetera, et cetera. But two wrongs don't make a right. So just because we already have an unjustifiable welfare state from a libertarian or classical perspective, doesn't mean to add another wrong and say people can't come here. It just reinforces the importance of making the case that nobody should have welfare. Nobody should have be forced to pay and mandatorily attend government-run schools. So it just reinforces the case for freedom. Other than if you want to restrict people from naturally having babies and increasing the infrastructure cost of more children in America.
All right. Ben's got a second part of the question. Opening the doors, quote, the floodgates to foreigners is imagined to be dangerous and deleterious to, quote, our way of life. If government continues to be unable to maintain law and order and either imprison or execute or expel criminal immigrants, how do we handle this?
That's a matter of law enforcement. I mean, many people feel that the law has become lax about native-born American criminals. Oh, it's a revolving door. They get a slap on the wrist. Uh, they 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 they're not held in a prison long enough. They aren't paying a reasonable price for the crime that they've committed against another person or the person's property. So so uh, so you can make these claims about the law in general. Now, I think that sometimes the law is abusive. I think the law sometimes violates people's rights in the criminal justice system. Um, but I would say is that admitting all of that, the purpose of government is to properly and appropriately protect individuals from the violence and the fraud and the crime, criminal activity of others in the society. So yes, you should make the case that the law should do its job in properly enforcing the law against invasions of life and property. The fact that immigrants may not come here and some may undertake criminal activity, and the courts fail to go take them through the court system in an appropriate way, and if they're found guilty, having appropriate punishments for them as the law would provide, is just a particular instance of the failure of the legal system to do its proper job, and no more and no less. Let us suppose that again there were no more there was a stop of immigrants, but just Americans, native-born Americans, suddenly became more criminal. I mean, then you'd still have the same complaint about the judicial system.
Okay, we're running out of time. We're gonna stop by 8, but so I'm gonna skip around. If I skip your question, I apologize. I'm just kind of scrolling through and seeing ones that I think are more interesting. Feel free to ask your question again in the next several weeks with our speakers. But this guy says, absurd. National borders exist for a reason. How do you address that, Richard?
Well, national borders exist for a reason, but as jurisdiction separating which political entity has responsible to secure the life and liberty of its citizens. And that's it. There's a reason why there are state borders. You know, there's a state line separating Oklahoma from Texas, separating North Carolina from South Carolina. There are historical reasons for where these boundaries are. There are political rationales of a division of powers and separation of jurisdictions to restrain tyranny and to allow people to have other jurisdictions within their own country to move to if they feel oppressed in some way by their state government or their municipal government. As people leave, as we were talking about just a few minutes ago, from California, Massachusetts to, let's say, to come to South Carolina, which seems less tax or regulatory oppressive. So that yes, there's purposes for borders, but the borders are there merely to secure the rights of human beings in their jurisdiction, and no more and no less. I see no special thing that, by golly, this defines America. Yes, it defines America as a political entity on a political map of the world, but not to close the door, the walls, put up walls, close the doors. It's merely to be administrative conveniences, and that's it. The
Yeah,
same
that
have state and municipal governments.
I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions in this area, that because we advocate the right to cross a border, that the border disappears.
Correct.
But the border doesn't disappear.
Right.
You know, people cross into Virginia from Maryland every day. They cross the Potomac River, which is the border for most of the two states, and the border's there.
Yes.
It's people crossing it.
They have
Uh,
their own legal systems and their own police forces.
yeah, when they come into Virginia, they're now subject to our laws. They can't say, "Oh, well, no, I'm from Maryland. I don't have to obey your laws."
Correct.
All right. Should taxpayers have to subsidize migrants who enter the country? I think we know the answer to that, but go ahead.
Well, of course not. And as you know, if I personally have no problem in saying you can immigrate here, but you're freely, no border restrictions in the way we have been talking about, but you're ineligible for welfare. To me, that's just a first step to eliminating welfare for everyone who wants to make an entitlement claim for it. Uh, but no, of course, Americans shouldn't have to, but I shouldn't have to pay the welfare of native-born Americans. Why shouldn't I be responsible for my family's education, retirement, healthcare, and other amenities and needs that it's presumed the state has to provide? I would say that why should I be paying for people's welfare in not just in South Carolina, but in Idaho or New Hampshire? Yeah, no, of course you shouldn't have to.
Okay, we got a couple minutes left. What would you do while foreign countries are literally releasing their prisoners into this open border? Well, we're not talking about releasing. An open border is just free movements of people, but you get the point that convicted prisoners in other countries would be free to cross the border. Richard, how do you address that?
Well, first of all, we have two categories here at least. Why have they been a prisoner or a convicted criminal in their home country? One could be it's because of political opposition, political dissent. Uh, uh, that could be the reason. Or you violated some laws in your own country, which are really victimless crimes, including government restrictions in the economy that you've had to deal with underground or black market activities to make a living. But you failed to pay someone a bribe, so they arrested you and you ended up in jail. That's how a lot of immigrants were coming to America in earlier generations. And then there might be people who were, quote, criminals, and their own governments are just saying, you're free, and they choose to come to the United States. The only thing I would then say is that, are you a criminal now in America? And if you now act in a criminal way, in the way that you've defined it as a classical liberal violation of life, liberty, and the property of another, if you commit a criminal act here, you're eligible to a trial, and if you're convicted, a punishment. Then that's it. The same way as with any other American. But let us suppose that someone has been a criminal in their home country, and either they reach the end of their sentence, or the government just wanted to get rid of prison costs there, and they let you out early, and you come to the United States, and you don't want to have a life like that anymore. You're turning over a new leaf, and now you live an honest life here. What's the problem? If you turn to a life of crime, that's no different than an honest person born in the United States who takes up criminality. Then you're a criminal who is subject to the law and the resulting punishments that the law may provide.
Okay, well, we're out of time, so I didn't get to everybody's question. I apologize. Please ask it again next week, and same time, same station. And the last one though is from somebody who says, "I don't have a question. Just want to say how much I appreciate y'all doing this series of talks."
And
Well,
if I and I know out of time, but if I just like to, if I may make a statement. First of all, I want to know, let every one of you who I may have had a chance to hear your questions, that I appreciated what you asked. And however persuasive or not my answers may seem to your ears, I hope you will, in your own ways, and particularly if you listen to the other speakers in the series, at least listen to this point of view and give it a fair shake, and make your own mind up of its strengths and weaknesses if that's what you do. But it is important from a liberty point of view to think about the right of people to move, both within a country and between countries, because without it, at the end of the day, people cannot be fully free. But thank you for listening and your questions.
yeah, thank you all for attending and participating and for your questions. And we look forward to seeing y'all next week. And Richard, thanks for the great presentation, for taking the time to share your perspectives with us. And thank you for all you've done for Liberty, including from the start of FFF. I'm very appreciative and honored to be your friend and comrade in this battle.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
All right, we'll see y'all next week. Thank you again.